Good afternoon, all. I'm Michael McGinnis, the Executive Officer of the National Academy of Medicine and Executive Director of the National Academy of Medicine's Leadership Consortium. It's my pleasure to wish you both a good afternoon and a good morning for those of you who are coming in from the West Coast. And it's my special privilege to welcome each of you to this joint meeting of two of the four Leadership Consortium Action Collaboratives, our Culture, Inclusion, and Equity Action Collaborative, and our Digital Health Action Collaborative. Appropriately, CAC, as we note the former, and DHAC, as we note the latter, are co-sponsoring today's discussion and webinar on a blended topic that captures at once our nation's most intractable problem, sustained and deepening health inequity, and a potential tool for progress. And at a minimum, hopefully not a contributor to compounding the problem, artificial intelligence and machine learning, which obviously is setting the stage for substantial transformative progress in the future. As noted, this session has been developed jointly by staff of the two collaboratives and under the guidance and leadership of the collaborative co-chairs. And it's my particularly pleasure to start with a note of underscored thanks to each of the collaborative co-chairs, Sandra Hernandez, Mary Naylor, and Bill Novelli, from the Culture, Inclusion, and Equity Action Collaborative, and John Perlin and Reed Tuckson from the Digital Health Action Collaborative. Apart from welcoming and thanking you, my task is to offer organizational concept for the leadership or context for the Leadership Consortium. And I've got a few slides that I'm going to use in that respect. We can start with this slide. Yes, the NAM Leadership Consortium is a unique enterprise within the national academies. It's made up of stakeholder leaders at the most senior level in private, public, and independent organizations from the key health sectors in the nation. And those leaders who collaborate under the auspices of the National Academy of Medicine for action on their common interest in advancing effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and continuous learning in health, medical care, and biomedical science. The focus of the consortium and its component collaboratives is fundamentally integrative and aligning in nature, which is so important given the fact that we have a health system in this nation in particular, which, while sophisticated, is fundamentally fragmented. And that fragmentation interferes with all of these important dimensions of effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and continuous learning. And that's our task as the Leadership Consortium, is to do what we can to work against the tendency towards silos. The approach that we take, next slide please, is to focus on our common interests in advancing the learning health system. That is one in which science, informatics, incentives, and culture are aligned for continuous improvement, innovation, and equity, with best practices and discovery seamlessly embedded in the delivery process, individuals and families, active participants in all elements, and new knowledge generated as an integral byproduct of the delivery experience. So note the issue of science, informatics, incentives, and culture. Often those are issues that are dealt with in separate compartments. And our interest as we move to advance a learning health system that can achieve the potential the nation has is to ensure that they work together. Next slide, please. So we work through action collaboratives, as noted, underscoring the fact that we are collaborating among sectors for action that makes a difference. Next slide, please. And we worked through the 4 collaboratives that I mentioned earlier. Evidence science is undertaken through our Evidence Mobilization Action Collaborative. Informatics through our Digital Health Action Collaborative, co-sponsored today. Incentives through our Value, Incentives, and Systems Action Collaborative. And culture through our Culture, Inclusion, and Equity Action Collaborative. Again, a co-sponsor of today's focus. Next slide, please. For each of those collaboratives in science, informatics, incentives, and culture, there are organizational networks. So we structure around the notion of facilitating organizational cooperation and common purpose. There are anchor principles that help orient the organizations within those networks for common purpose. There are key progress indicators that have been developed by the participants in the collaborative, and there are collaborative projects that are sponsored in order to help move the frontiers of progress. We're not going to go into these issues today, just providing that as general background to our modus operandi, if you will. Today, our focus, next slide, is on the leadership consortium initiatives related to digital health and equity. I'll mention just briefly some of the examples in that respect. Our publication on artificial intelligence in healthcare, the Hope, Hype, Promise, and Peril, which laid out a broad set of vision and action opportunities in the field of AI in healthcare. We've followed up that with collaborative work with the Government Accounting Office, GAO, on technology assessments that relate to artificial intelligence as a means of not only advancing understanding, but especially engaging Congress, as GAO is a creature of Congress, if you will, in the interest in activity. Next slide, please. Just a few other examples of work that's currently underway related to digital health and equity within the consortium. We have a expert panel developing a piece on digital innovation, the path to a healthier future, which lays out a blueprint for the digital opportunities in that respect. We have an expert panel focused on technologies to enhance patient, family, and community engagement, especially important, underscored in the COVID-19 pandemic activities in which telehealth became so important, but really there are many other opportunities in technology that are developing to improve the ability to genuinely engage people who are our primary targets for these activities. And then finally, a project we have underway to develop meaningful measures of community engagement. Fundamentally important if we're going to be able to effectively reduce health inequities by marshaling all the resources within communities. Next slide, please. And then we have COVID tech sector impact assessments, taking advantage of the fact that we have 9 different sectors as components of our leadership consortium. You see them listed here, and they have, through their leadership capacity, done deep dives into the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic in each of the sectors with an eye to identifying broad health system transformation opportunities. And we're now turning our attention to how we can mobilize cross-cutting multi-sector leadership to capture those opportunities. Again, we won't go into that in detail now, but just to give you, again, a reinforcing view, if you will, of the integrative and aligning nature of the work. Next slide, please. And here we have the co-chairs of our Culture, Inclusion, and Equity Action Collaboratives. Mary Naylor, who is the director of the Center for Healthcare Transitions at the University of Pennsylvania. Bill Novelli, who's the former CEO of AARP, and currently a leader in transformation in a variety of venues, Bill Novelli, and Sandra Hernandez, who is the president of the California Healthcare Foundation. Thanks to each of you for your leadership, both in putting together this agenda and for your leadership to the collaborative and the consortium as a whole. Next slide, please. And here we have our Digital Health Action Collaborative co-chairs, Reed Tuxen from Tuxen Health Connections, who again has had senior CEO and C-suite level experience in virtually all the major domains of health, whether it relates to the professional leadership in the AMA, the work in academic health centers, the leadership in health payer organizations with United Healthcare, or especially meaningful to me as a Washington, D.C. resident, is Reed got his start as the Director of Health in the District of Columbia. And Jonathan Perlin, who's the President of Clinical Services at HCA Healthcare, and also the former chairman of the American Hospital Association, the chairman of the National Quality Forum, the former chief executive of the Veterans Health Administration, and again, the list goes on. These are extraordinarily dedicated and accomplished leaders that we have to be able to draw upon. It's my great privilege and pleasure to turn the floor over to them with, again, deep gratitude for each of their contributions. And I think we're going to lead off with Sandra Hernandez and Reed Tuxen.
Thank you, Michael. Very nice to be with everybody today. And on behalf of all the co-chairs, I want to add my welcome to each and every one of you for joining us for this morning's webinar. I think on behalf of both of the collaboratives, we recognize that AI has the potential to significantly advance health equity in this country. And also as a tool, it used inappropriately might well also exacerbate problems that we have in the way data is collected, the way data is used. And so today's webinar was really put together on behalf of both collaboratives to look at really how to use this capability, machine learning, AI, in a way that creates a framework for advancing health equity. And in the case of our collaborative in particular, to make sure that consumer participation, transparency, understanding how these algorithms work, that those are all deeply embedded as we move forward with this form of digital transformation. I can tell you that here in California, we have been using a lot of data analytics and AI as we've tried to allocate resources in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in particular, we've worked closely with the state of California as they've tried to assess in real time public health data, social service data, low-income demographic data as a way to really target both testing capabilities, vaccine outreach, and in general resource allocation. There are many, many ways in which AI will transform our healthcare system. And what you'll hear today from the extraordinary program that's been put together by the NAM staff are some of the early learnings about how to use these tools effectively to accelerate health equity, and what some of the warning signals are and what we should be aware of. And then the end of the program really talk about how we can work together to put in action the learnings and experiences of our extraordinary panel. So on behalf of all of the co-chairs, I welcome you to the program. And now I'll turn it over to Reed, who's going to go through the outline of the day. Welcome.
Terrific. Oh. Thank you, Sandra. I was a little trouble with the computer, but I really appreciate this. And on behalf of my colleague, Jonathan Perlin, who co-chairs the Digital Health Action Collaborative, I'm very happy to be joining in with my other colleagues on this. Just to give you a sense of the Digital Health Action Collaborative, we have been working tirelessly with so many key stakeholders to really try to, as my colleague Jonathan always describes, to take the digital dividend and make it real. Mike McGinnis is always so good at laying out the strategic construct for all of our various collaborative efforts. And for our Digital Health Action Collaborative, we really do have a bias towards action. And that's our name now actually is all about Action Collaborative. How do we then move forward with the digital health infrastructure to really make it a core utility in real terms every day to support a learning health system? We, outside of the specific confines of this conversation, are really trying to promote the creation of industry-wide health data stewardship standards that can solve the problems of consent, privacy, security, and all of those for those who are handling health data and make sure that there are no conundrums or impediments that will frustrate us, making this really transform how care is delivered and how we improve care on a continuous updated basis. We are looking at issues of how to use synthesized actionable information in care decisions that are made not only by providers, but also by individuals, and making sure that there's equitable access in underserved communities. This issue of how this agenda fits in with underserved communities is particularly important to me. And I think if we've learned anything from this pandemic, that the now prevailing sense of distrust, not only in the Black community, but across the nation, but especially in the Black community, this overwhelming sense of distrust is a real concern. And how we will be able to talk candidly and transparently about the algorithms and how those algorithms for AI have been constructed will be particularly important. Especially challenging will be not only to talk about this sort of what can appear scary to so many people, but to also be able to explain highly technical concepts in ways that people who have not benefited from an adequate science education will be able to understand. We have learned from this pandemic that we are reaping the benefits, or rather, more precisely stated, the consequences of the underinvestment in science and math education in our schools generally, but in the schools where people of color are so often segregated. And so we will be focusing overall in the days to come on that agenda. But as it relates to today and specifically, we want to turn now to the agenda itself and begin to understand that in our next session, our speaker will provide an overview of the digital health landscape and the overall societal impact of AI machine learning, highlighting critical concepts and issues that must be addressed to achieve the desired objectives. After that, we'll drill down to the topic of bias, key concept, and how it can appear in the development, implementation, use, calibration, and evaluation of AI-enabled tools. Presentations in this session will discuss ways to identify and mitigate bias while also working to ensure equity. Following this, we'll feature innovative real-world applications of AI to support equity within different sectors, such as government and research. And then we will hear reactions and key takeaways from panelists on the preceding sessions. I want to remind everyone that there is this bias towards action. And so when we get these reactions and the takeaways, we really, really are hoping that we will get real reactions that will take us and move us forward to where we need to be with specificity. And then to wrap up, the Action Collaborative co-chairs, panelists, and reactors will share final thoughts as we adjourn and go forward. I want to remind everyone in terms of the logistics, speakers, we really are asking our panelists to turn your video on when speaking, and remember to keep yourself muted when you are not talking. Keep a close eye on the chat for any messages from the staff on timing. We need to stay on time. We need to stay on time. If you're a participant, please go ahead and type your questions in the Q&A. We want your questions. Please feel free to engage with us online. And you'll find those located in the controls on the bottom of your screen. Include your name and your organization, if applicable, so that we will have the ability to know kind of locating maybe and being more specific in responding to your particular question. Panelists are welcome to type any questions directly that are addressed to them that are not picked up by the moderators, and you can have your own conversation with the audience as we go forward. We also note that we encourage our panelists to use the raise hand feature in the Zoom if you would like to say something, and we will make sure you are recognized. And then lastly, a recording and copies of these presentations will be available to view after the event concludes. And so now with that, let me turn it over to my friend and co-partner, John.